Australia is home to beautiful beaches, laid-back locals, and deadly wildlife. Yet when Europeans first set foot in Australia, they thought it would only be useful as a penal colony. But those who did get sent to Australia had the last laugh. Their descendants now reside in a country that consistently ranks high on lists of best places to live in the world. The UK doesn't even make it into the top 10. So let's look at how Australia went from a British penal colony to an economic powerhouse. Humans first discovered Australia around 50,000 years ago. No one knows how humans arrived on the continent, but it was continually inhabited ever since. While Australia probably had visitors from other nations like China, India, and Indonesia, none of them ever recorded their journeys there. Despite no concrete proof of its existence, the idea that there was a large continent in the south was well known. Some maps, including one astronomical treatise published in 1545, showed this mythical landmass and named it Terra Australis, Southern Land. During the Age of Discovery, European explorers were determined to seek out countries and lands previously unknown to them. There is some evidence that the Portuguese were the first to see the Australian coastline, but the Dutch can claim to be the first Europeans to set foot in Australia in 1606, although they mistook it for New Guinea. In 1616, another Dutch sailing ship landed accidentally in Western Australia. The crew briefly explored but found nothing worth staying for and departed. At least 3 Dutch expeditions landed in Australia, but they thought nothing of it, believing they were on a small island instead of an entire continent. When James Cook led his 1768 to 1771 expedition to the South Pacific, he wasn't exactly sailing into the unknown. Although his official mission was to make astronomical observations, he was under orders to find the southern continent and claim it for the British. On April 29, 1770, Cook and his men landed on the east coast of Australia. Cook was less than impressed and noted that he didn't find anything he thought was worth trading and reported it was not a good place to colonize. He named the area New South Wales and then left, smashing straight into the Great Barrier Reef, which damaged his ship so badly he had to spend nearly 2 months repairing it. Cook did not believe this land was actually Australia and lamented that he failed to discover the so much talked of southern continent, which perhaps does not exist. But not knowing where he was didn't stop Cook from claiming it, and he wrote that he took possession of the whole eastern coast, basically claiming finders keepers, even though the country was not lost in the first place and very much inhabited. The British went on to chart their coastline of Australia and realized that it was the mysterious southern continent. Soon, no number of deadly creatures could deter the British from colonizing their latest land acquisition. Even the distinct lack of gold artifacts didn't stop them from sending over British citizens to the new continent. The primary motivation for this move was the American Revolution, as Britain had lost lands and authority there. In October 1786, Arthur Phillip was commissioned by the British government to set up an agricultural work camp in Australia that British convicts would operate. On May 13, 1787, a fleet of 11 ships sailed to New South Wales. This group was a mix of convicts and settlers, led by Captain Phillip, and totaled around 570 male and 160 female convicts, accompanied by about 250 military troops and free people. The fleet landed at Botany Bay, where Cook had first made landfall nearly 20 years ago. However, they found the land unsuitable for permanent settlement and continued sailing to Port Jackson, landing in Sydney Cove on January 26, 1788. Unlike Cook, Phillip saw the potential for colonizing Australia, citing the many medicinal herbs and the climate, which he felt was equal to the finest in Europe. Phillip had noble ideas for his new settlement. Before leaving England, he had stated, "In a new country, there will be no slavery, and hence no slaves." The criminals that made up the largest portion of the group were not excluded from positions of responsibility, but Phillip ruled with a stern hand, and hangings and floggings were common. Due to the colonists being unfamiliar with farming and the climate, which was very different from what they had known back in England, the colony was on the verge of starvation for the first few years. However, they persevered, and when Phillip returned to England in 1792, the settlement continued to develop and soon became prosperous. January 26 is still celebrated and commiserated in Australia. Australians of European descent call it Australia Day, but Aboriginal Australians know it as Invasion Day. Despite the hardships and opposition from the locals, Britain kept sending people to Australia. Convicts, farmers, entrepreneurs, and anyone who wanted to find a new life outside England headed for the southern continent. In 1796, John MacArthur, determined to start a wool industry in Australia, brought a flock of Spanish merino sheep that had been reared in South Africa. Previously, sheep had been brought to Australia for meat rather than wool. The entirety of Australia was circumnavigated by a British naval officer called Matthew Flinders in 1801. Flinders confirmed that it was indeed one large landmass and suggested the name be changed from New Holland, as the Dutch had named it, to Australia. Flinders also determined that Tasmania was separate from the mainland by sailing through the Bass Strait, enabling British ships to reach New South Wales quicker. While it is commonly believed that Britain's sole reason for colonizing Australia was to relieve the British prison systems, modern historians now think that the British government had ulterior motives. Britain possibly wanted to gain a strategic position in the eastern seas and use the settlement as a base to exploit the area for economic purposes. By sending convicts over first, they could assess the viability of the settlement, and if the settlement failed and they all died, no one would miss a bunch of criminals. By 1827, Britain had claimed all of Australia, with British settlements spreading out from Sydney and more permanent colonies forming in Western Australia. While Arthur Phillip had imagined a new country free of slavery, the reality of keeping a convict workforce showed in the authoritarian social structure set up by the British. Colony governors were service officers, and despite various acts designed to implement some legislative system, there were no real representative systems. Due to the socio-political climate, there were many uprisings by officers who sought to overthrow the governors for their own gain. Besides the military factions, another group had formed that was concerned with the rights of the former convicts. Governor Lachlan Macquarie associated himself with this emancipist group and clashed with other former officers and wealthy free immigrants over whether the criminals should have any claim to resources or input into how the settlements were governed. The assertion that the convict population should have any sway over the colonies in Australia did not sit well with the imperial government. Wealthy men were encouraged to move to New South Wales and Tasmania to combat the emancipist movement. They were given areas of land in return for leading economic and social development. However, the emancipists continued under the leadership of a convict son, William Charles Wentworth. Wentworth founded the Australian newspaper in 1824 and used it to spearhead his campaign. New convicts arriving during the 1820s were often assigned to private employers and were enslaved in all but name. Any convicts found guilty of further offenses after their arrival were sent to secondary penal stations at Macquarie Harbour, Moreton Bay, and Norfolk Island. As the British settlements spread into Western Australia, they were met with hot, dry land, unlike New South Wales. The colonization of Western Australia was a struggle for the immigrants and was more about survival than anything else. Before long, there were plans to colonize the South. British social reformer Edward Gibbon Wakefield argued that if they sold land at a sufficient price, landowners would have to maximize the value of the land by cultivating it. Laborers would also be lured to the area by promising them land if they first aided in cultivation projects. Of course, all of these plans conveniently forgot about anyone already living in the area. Adelaide was settled in late 1836, and the colony was a success, largely due to an emphasis on free market forces, family migration, and equality, as long as you were white. Throughout the 1840s, a separate settlement started to call for constitutional independence, and in 1842, New South Wales created a two-thirds elective legislature. By 1850, this had been extended to include Tasmania, South Australia, and Victoria by the Australian Colonies Government Act. From 1830 to the 1860s, the European population in Australia boomed exponentially. In 1825, the Europeans numbered around 50,000, but by 1861, the non-Aboriginal inhabitants of Australia numbered around 1,150,000. This influx of people was largely due to the Australian Gold Rush, which began in 1851. States began to form, and 4 of Australia's current 6 states were created by 1859. Europeans continued to explore the continent and its surrounding islands. Although the colonies had largely established democracy by 1860, the upper social structure remained elitist, and Australia was still under British monarchical rule. There was a continual struggle between the liberals, who were advanced regarding social reform, and those who benefited from the traditional social structures. The reformers pushed for free, secular, and compulsory education, to the horror of the Roman Catholic Church, which tried to set up their own religious schools to respond to the godless schools of the liberals. Social services and legislation were formed to protect white workers, but racist restrictions were placed on other cultures. Australia's first steps toward independence came in 1901, when the 6 self-governed colonies got together to form the Commonwealth of Australia. Throughout the 1890s, representatives from Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia, and South Australia convened to draft the Australian Constitution. The colonialists then approved the Constitution by a series of referendums. But Australia did not gain complete independence from Britain at this point, and the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act 1900 had to be approved by the British Parliament before it came into effect on January 1, 1901. Although Australia became nominally independent, the British government still held control over legislative powers and conducted foreign relations for Australia, which remained part of the Commonwealth. In 1931, Australia was offered the chance to become entirely independent from Britain. However, due to the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, Australia felt that being backed up by the British Army was not a bad thing. During World War II, Australian Prime Minister Menzies stated that as Britain was at war, so was Australia. However, as Germany allied with Japan, Australia's main concern was protecting itself. Britain was preoccupied with the conflict in Europe, so Australia realized it needed to look to America for protection. A pivotal moment came at the end of 1941, when John Curtin, the Australian Prime Minister, declared that Australia was free from traditional links of kinship with Great Britain and appealed to the U.S. for support, independently pursuing its own foreign policy. In 1942, the Statute of Westminster Adoption Act was implemented, giving Australia autonomous control of both internal and external affairs. But it wasn't until 1986 that the Australia Act eliminated all British authority at the federal level. Australia has become a wealthy first-world country, and many factors contributed to this. First were its large quantities of mineral deposits, including gold, silver, iron ore, nickel, diamonds, opal, natural gas, and oil. Australia's vast territories are used for crop production, and the country has become one of the largest producers of food in the world. Grains, cereals, fruits, and vegetables are grown in various parts of the continent. It is said that Australia was built on the sheep's back, and today Australia accounts for 6% of the global sheep flock. As well as being third in sheep production, cows make Australia the world's second largest beef exporter. As Australia was, and still is, sparsely populated, it allows the country to maintain relatively high living standards, making it a desirable place to live. Australia's migration policies also set it apart from many other countries, as Australia strives to attract highly qualified and skilled workers. Australia also has a thriving tourist trade, although this has admittedly been affected by COVID restrictions. When Cook landed in Botany Bay all those years ago, little did he know that the place which he asserted doth not produce any one thing that can become an article in trade would go on to become the economic success it is today. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the history of Australia, check out our book, History of Australia, a captivating guide to Australian history, starting from the Aborigines through the Dutch East India Company, James Cook, and World War II to the present. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.